guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Mackay here with Ironside Ranch. We got a real special guest tonight. We got on-site Travis here and from down in Florida, and we're going to be talking a little bit about land tonight and kind of how to go about purchasing it, what you're looking for, why you should be looking at it. And to jump into that, I wanted to talk about the story that just came out, and I'll post it in the description below. But because of the food shortages and everything going on, the labor shortages, looks like Australia is actually doing some rationing on their meat, and that's obviously problematic. But it's pretty unreal the amount that they're rationing. So they're saying packets of minced chicken breasts, chicken thighs, and sausage. It's I guess 2 per family that they're limited to. So it's pretty ridiculous the amount of control that they're making there with the food. So we want to talk about if you're a young guy and you're by yourself, it's easy for you to be able to move with the times and go someplace and that you can get a job on a farm and you can work, or you can go and you can trap and hunt and find your own food. But when you're a guy that has 2 kids and a wife and you're trying to handle all this, then your options are a little bit more limited. And one of the best things that you can do is to get out of the city and the subdivision and get to a place that allow you to grow food. That doesn't mean that you're moving to somewhere that's 20 acres, but anywhere, if you're looking at something that's even 1 acre or make use of a half an acre, there is a lot that you can do. So the bottom line is that we're going to jump into this on how to get the land. So Travis, how you doing tonight?
Good, man. How are you doing?
Good. Staying busy. So, Travis, I guess to jump into this, you said your viewers had some questions, and so that's kind of where it kicked off from. And so I don't know if you want to start with any of those questions or kind of where you want to pick up from.
So my guys are like, how do we acquire land? Because I hear ranch land often spoke about. We have to define ranch. We got Eric the Pond Digger. I'll send him this video, but he's a California native. Apparently ranch is 5 acres in California. I don't know if we can qualify ranch land as 5 acres, but
you jump on the homesteading forums and it's the same obnoxious argument where people are like, oh, you have to be doing this much to qualify as homesteading. You're not off grid if you're still connected to the internet. And it's, I don't know, it's stupid arguments. And it's like, let's just define ranch. If you're trying to grow your own food and provide some semblance of self-sufficiency for your family, you're on a ranch.
Okay.
It might be a hobby farm. It might not be a commercial ranch, but you're on a ranch. And
all right. So a lot of guys go, all right, I'm in a bad spot. I acknowledge that. Maybe you're sitting in like Canada and they're literally like, you can't cross the border unless you have a pharmaceutical drug that's experimental, et cetera. And they're like, I'm trapped. And to which you're never really trapped, because you always have the option. You always have the option of choice. The consequences are different, but you always have the option of choice. But as far as how does one obtain property, I think that's the bigger question. And I heard from you the other night on my channel, you suggested getting in with a landowner and leasing and caring for the land in a way that you're a good steward of the land and creating cash flows and then jumping from there. So I figured you could probably expedite on that.
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do this. So, and it really depends on where in the country you are. I mean, you can buy scrubland in most states for, next to nothing. We've looked down in southern Alabama, and I can buy 100 acres in southern Alabama for $30,000. I mean, this is all before the COVID, but last time I was looking down there. But now after COVID, who knows what the prices are. But this pre-COVID, you could buy 100 acres for $30,000. Now, it was scrubland, it was swampland, and it was going to take some land healing and some work to do to take care of that. But so there's options out there to buy that scrubland. The ideal land is all taken by the farmers and the people that are doing this production. And so we're kind of left with what's left over. And there's ways of doing that. Like if you want to move and roll it into your mortgage, you can purchase land that way. That's always an option if you're willing to maybe take 2 steps back and downsize on the house a little bit to get 2 steps forward, to get 1 step back to get 2 steps forward. I'm sorry. And then if you don't want to leave your subdivision, let's say you're close to your work. I know my brother, he's kind of stuck in Chicago and he can't really get out of that subdivision. But if you want to grow your own food, there's options with community gardens. There's options with getting on with landowners, people that have 20, 30, 50, 100 acres that'll just lease you out 5 acres. And it's usually next to nothing. And they'll do it because if you're a good steward of the land and you talk to them about, hey, this is my plan to actually make this land more valuable to you, who's going to turn that down? You take my land from a $1,500 an acre property to a $7,000 an acre property all day long. Run it, baby. I won't even charge it. So that's kind of one of the things that you can do. And there's lease options out there. If you ever look up Greg Judy, he got a lot of information in his books about how to do that. But that's you're looking more on a commercial scale. If you want to, so there's two levels here. Whether you're talking about I want to grow food and sell it, or I just want to grow food and feed my family. And so those two things, things come into play there. And if you want to grow food to feed your family, you can do a lot on 1 acre. And I know you do. I mean, you've got stuff on your place there, and you're on 6 acres there, I believe, what you said. And you've got what, fruit trees and microgreens and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're probably over the 30 trees now, probably 35, maybe 40 at this point. My whole thing has been like just plant, and then I'm learning about intercropping and like putting onion with tomato and like trying to, like this past
Carrots love tomatoes. That's the book to get for that.
Carrots love tomatoes. That's the book.
That's the book. Yeah, my wife loves that one.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna put that down. So anyway, for guys that are looking to get out on property, there's a couple ways to do it. My story is unique, but also for the younger guys, you'll understand the word based. I'm trying to teach a ninja the word based and some of these Gen X guys, but they don't know like what based is. But I'm based as AF. All right. Like I'm based. And so I saw this whole thing on playing in 2011. I had this guy at a storage lot. I had a lawn and landscape company. And the guy that worked at the storage lot that kind of like rented you your little roll-up unit and your little parking spot. I had like a place to park a trailer, roll-up spot, keep all the tools in. And he's like, hey, have you seen this show called Tiny Homes, whatever? And I was like, no, what's a tiny home? Anyway, fast forward a few years into the future, I built a tiny home. I'm actually broadcasting from it here. So I've got everything I need for a house in a 10 by 20 space.
Okay.
Everything.
That's interesting. My wife and I actually looked at doing that, but a little bit harder with 2 kids, so we decided.
Yeah, I only have 1 kid, and it works fine. But like it now, you will be outside more. It's not something I would recommend for like an up north situation. You'd have to go a little bit more because I do have like an outdoor shower and I've got like a couple of things like that. But it's an option. Depends on the county you're in. Depends on regulations. Depends if it's mobile or if it's fixed to a foundation. If it's mobile, the rules for water coming into the structure and water leaving the structure may be different. If it's fixed to a foundation, you may need to require a septic field or whatever, or a pump out tank or something like that for your gray and black water. But nonetheless, I was able to house hack. And I don't think a lot of millennials and Gen Z understand this. You have to be able to house hack, whether you're going to go get a traditional house and make it a duplex and rent one side and pay the mortgage and live on the other side.
Right.
Or if you're going to go, or if you're going to go like, we discussed the van life option, which doesn't get you into acquiring property. So you're not paying down something that with equity. But nonetheless, the way I did it is I rented land for $650 for 2 acres in Sarasota, Florida, a few years ago. And I had it like a zip code where there was nothing in my zip code like under 500 grand. And so I was like the guy that was out there and had 2 acres and I was able to start a nursery. So I got like 2 acres of plant material growing. I was able to take in like asphalt from road jobs. I was able to take in like compost from landscape jobs. I was able to start like those cash flows that kind of come in the ranching life. And I had the equipment, like I had the Bobcats and stuff. That was my main business. And then I had my structure that was mobile. But it still had like everything I needed in a 10 by 20 structure. And I like literally built it like myself. Like I started with like almost like a shed like cabin that I was able to buy. It was like hurricane rated and all the stuff you needed. And then I just finished it out and turned it into an office cabin. Got a kitchen here, everything I need, bedroom, the whole thing. This kind of the way I look at it here too with our property is we had kind of the rent hacking thing, because basically what I did is I knew I wanted land and I knew what I wanted to do with the land. I knew I wanted to have a firing range so I could teach classes again. I knew I wanted to be able to grow some food and grow some livestock and stuff like that. And in the South, you can do a lot more with a lot less land because of our growing season down here. Yeah.
Our land here will support a cattle herd somewhere between about 30 and 50. at any given time, and as we continue to develop the pastures. And so what I did is I found land that basically was within my mortgage, and so that had a house on it. So I bought the house, the land appraised basically basically got the land for free because the mortgage covered the house. And so that's kind of the way that we did it, is like, okay, I knew I wanted the land, so we'll just roll it into a traditional mortgage. And so there's lots of options out there for people that want to do this. So it really, if you're just creative, you'll find it, because even traditional land notes, if you just go to a farm credit bank, you'll be able to get land notes for about 7% over 20 years. It tends to be about the general rates that we're seeing on stuff like that. And that's obviously astronomically high, but hell, if you put a tiny house on there and you've got no other payments, that's pretty reasonable, and you're going to walk away with 40 or 50 acres.
Yeah, and if you can do another cash flow on it,
yeah,
like your gun school, teaching people how to shoot, any other cash flows that you can do on it. I started in the landscaping space, so I had like rip outs and I had all that waste material, and I started composting it. And in Florida, we're literally built on sand, and we used to be underwater not too many years back, and so we have no organics in the soil.
Yeah.
So I started composting because I'm like, compost is rare, and nobody cares about it down here yet, but I'm trying to grow a lot of food and a lot of permaculture. And by permaculture, I mean things that you plant and they just grow. Like I have olive trees that should be good for 400 years past my lifetime. Citrus trees, almond trees, cherry trees, like all those type of things. And then I do the microgreens and things like that underneath them, mix the tomatoes in there, mix the onions in there. And a lot of that is just like, I don't want to eat this garbage food that is provided to us, like the stuff that has tons of pesticides on it, is genetically modified. I mean, whatever side of the fence you're on, there's some good there, but there's also some really bad. And then in addition to that, like a lot of people don't realize just like how much, like a lot of guys don't realize how much estrogen is just in city water.
Yeah,
like
it's unreal. And yeah, no, I'm with you. I mean, that's why we're on a well here, and why we dug the well here, and we're getting that in about another month. We'll be doing videos on how to install your well pumps and everything. We got a 250-foot well here. We'll be doing videos on how to install deep wells. I know you probably don't deal too much with deep wells.
No, we're at 80. I had guys do it. It would cost me like 10 grand. They came out. They're like the most reputable company in town, 80 feet. They hit water at like 20. Our water table's like at 6, but like good water started showing up at like around 40. It went down to 80, and like,
so we hit water at 200. The well driller took it to 260, and so we'll hang our pump at about 230 or so. So we'll go over. I've got all the materials for that. So we're going to be doing the videos on how to get that up and going here in the next about the next month or two. And but anyway, so yeah, realizing what's in what you're eating, and people just don't think about it. When you buy a steak at Walmart, you're eating everything that cow ate, and what that cow has been eating is ivermectin and antibiotics at the feedlot, as well as a bunch of corn and grain. And cows are not carnivores. They're herbivores. They're supposed to be eating grass. They're not supposed to be eating corn. Corn is not very digestible. That's why we see it in the manure when it comes out back in. And it's just not good for them. And there's anything in moderation is fine, but it's not, it's the fact that we're feeding them out on it. It'd be like me giving you a Snickers bar to feed you out. It just doesn't, it's not good for you. And the ivermectin, and then you've got the the Roundup that we're being used, and we're treating all our fields with Roundup and then feeding that stuff to the cows as well, because it's easier to grow corn if I round up the field than use a genetically modified corn that's resistant to the Roundup. Well, the Roundup's still in the corn base, and so and then we're using synthetic fertilizers, and everybody says, well, synthetic fertilizer is the same thing as regular as organic fertilizer. It's absolutely not. The atomic mass of the atom is actually different, and people don't realize that. Well, what are those extra I believe it's electrons, what do those extra electrons do? Well, nobody really knows, but my suggestion is that they do something, because we saw a bunch of health effects start to decline as soon as GMOs and all these pesticides and everything were entered into the market back about the 1950s or so.
Yeah, and that's actually, I just recently learned, kind of a byproduct of the war. So prior to that, you have the 1930s, kind of like we go in these cycles. Humanity, certainly Western culture, tends to go in these 90 to 100 year cycles. We have the Dust Bowl in the 1930s. You have the Great Depression. Things are bad.
We have Dust Bowls now.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's where we're at in the cycle, where it's like we've stripped the topsoil, and we needed agriculture efficiency in the war just to fund the war effort, to feed a culture back home in the factories, and with to feed a bunch of troops overseas. And so we did this like big ag movement where we just synthetic fertilizers, chemicals, etc. A lot of monocultures, which is acidine to me. Like even in my own food forest, which is maybe expanding now to like half an acre. But I'm learning like you intercrop. If I had half an acre of like tomatoes, the amount of pests I would have would be astronomical.
Yeah, people don't, and that's why they have to use those chemicals on them. And that's, you talk to a farmer and ask them what they farm, and they're going to tell you, we do corn, or we do soybeans, or we do cattle. And it's like, when people ask me, it's like, what do you do? It's like, no, we do everything. I do chickens, I do goats, we do cows. We've got orchard trees that are planted that will be ready to harvest in a couple more years, to where we'll be having the orchard trees here. And monocultures are, or I'm sorry, polycultures are the way to go. Monocultures are not healthy for the land. And you can't name me one area in nature with a monoculture.
No, dude, I'll tell you, big YouTuber, almost 1 million subs, probably 1 million subs by the time this video goes. The Millennial Farmer. I was DMing him with him back and forth on comments, and he was nice enough to get back to me. And I was like, yo, why are you still doing monoculture at this point in the game? I mean, almost 1 million subs, hundreds of acres of ranch. And he's like, because that's what the market wants. And I'm like, time out, man. Flag on the play. Like, I don't agree. You know,
I don't either. And I think you're seeing a transition of people realizing that this is not healthy. It's not healthy for us. It's not healthy for our land. If you want to talk about global warming and get into that issue, if it's happening because of the farming practices, not because of cows farting.
100%.
It's happening because we're stripping the land every year and not growing anything back on it. And the proof is in the pudding.
Tilling is literally
the proof is in the pudding when you look at the dissection of the land. If you take a row crop land and you take a spoonful of that soil, there's basically no organic matter in there, and there's virtually no bacteria growing or any organisms in there. If you take a spoonful of healthy organic soil, there's more microbes on there than there are humans on the planet.
True comment back from Millennial Farmer, not to but I said, I just don't understand how you'd have any organics in the soil. And he responds with, well, it's pretty good. It's about 5%.
I don't think you can have 5% organic in the soil doing a traditional farming method.
You're saying like that's insane, like 5%. I'm sitting here going like, holy cow, I produce all of my own soil. Like I compost all my own tree trips from the tree guys. Like I have them come in, I pile them, I turn them, the whole thing. It takes me about 3 years to get like a good, decent thing going on. And I'm just like, 5% is your soil composition? Like that's insane to me. Like that just doesn't.
I would want to see the soil test, honestly, to believe that, because most row croppers are at 1% or below. And if you look at what the estimations for the soil, for the organic matter in the soil about 500 years ago here in the Americas stood between 8 and 12%. So 8 and 12% is what we naturally want to be at with organic matter in the soil. And we've lost about 5.5 feet of topsoil in that time frame as well. And so and it's all washing into the Gulf. I mean, it's just we're just stripping everything and destroying it. So
terrible. And that's my one thing. Being that you brought that up, I am most bullish. People are like, is it Bitcoin, silver, gold, like all those hard currencies? I'm telling you straight up, I'll go on record. I think compost is the most undervalued product on the planet.
Yeah,
genuinely think that. And we'll know in the next 5 years if I'm right or not. But I think compost is going to do like a 20 or 100x on you. I genuinely think so. So
yeah, I actually happen to agree with you that I think that things that these organic ideas on how to do this, I think that there's a lot of I don't even want to say that it's going to do 100x, because the fiat currency is worthless anyways. I mean, what's it going to do in comparison to Bitcoin is a different discussion.
Prices fall according to Bitcoin.
Yeah, but anyways, so it's one of those things where I just look at it and I realize that there are people that want to grow their own food because they know what they're getting at the store is crap. They know that when I buy a salmon that's a farm raised salmon, and the fact that they had to add a dye to it to make it look the same, there's something wrong with that. Salmon, the farm raised salmon has died. It doesn't have a deep color.
And that's the solution. I think for guys listening that are like, okay, you guys have been with us this long in the video, which is awesome. And you're like, what are our actionables here? What are the solutions? Like moving forward, solving these massive problems, I think is like where you build a fortune.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I genuinely do. Is like, I'm amazed at the intercropping, like your farm. When I saw you guys, you were on with Chris, the Ninja, a few other people. No, it was Jack with Nobody Special Finance.
Yeah.
That was the group. And you're like, so these fertilizer shortages, like the daily FUD, like, oh, fertilizer shortages, there won't be food. And you're like, yeah, we don't use fertilizer. That was my first introduction. He was like, yeah, we don't use fertilizer.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this guy gets it.
Yeah.
Like,
I don't pay that much attention to the fertilizer prices other than I know that it's going to bring the grocery store prices up, and it affects a lot of people. It doesn't personally affect me that much, which is why my beef prices have not changed this last year. We have not, I have not changed the poundage on what we're charging and everything. We haven't changed a bit. So when people buy meat from us, our target that we're trying to get to is that they pay between $7.50 and $9 a pound. And everybody says, well, that's ridiculous. How can I pay, that's outrageously expensive. And it's like, well, it is on ground beef. It's not on T-bones. So think about it. On a cow, on a full-size one of our cows, you're going to walk away. If you bought a whole cow, you'll walk away with between 250 and 300 pounds of meat. And about 100 to 125 pounds of that's going to be ground beef. So you're paying $8 a pound for the ground beef. But it's grass-fed ground beef with no chemicals. But you're also paying $8 a pound for T-bones and roasts and all your sirloins and ribeyes and everything as well.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing too is like when we talk about economics in a larger. Some guys are really into it. I was a nerd about economics, but if you imagine a falling dollar and the fact that we're not going to be able to import what we used to import, and what that means for domestic producers.
Yeah, this is one of the big arguments and why I've always said that we need to be more self-reliant on the U.S. and get away from this global market. It's why I like the idea of using our own oil here instead of, why are we buying any oil from anywhere else? I don't understand. Until we completely deplete the oil here in the next, 200 years, however long it takes, I don't understand why we're buying oil from anybody else. Let's use what we got while we develop other solutions for energy. And we all know that the solution for energy is nuclear. That's the nuclear power plants are the way to go in that realm anyway.
Yeah, I would probably push back against that a little bit because like I see the potential for nuclear. It does make me uncomfortable a little bit. I benefited from the uranium play this past year, so I saw that's pure supply and demand. If you guys are looking for investments, the uranium space is interesting because it's like 6 major producers, and you can pick a random 2 or 3 and you're going to be okay. If you got the supply and demand equation there right, you can just pick your biggest players. But nonetheless, like I spent my first fortune. I sold the company and I had a decent amount of cash at 18. I was pretty good. And I invested it in building a biodiesel startup.
Yeah, I remember you telling me.
What I learned through that process was like you can take wastewater, run algae through it, and if you've got sunlight and literally like sewage water, you can build algae, and if you can dry it and press it, you've got 50% weight biodiesel. Mm-hmm. Which is, so there's a lot of solutions out there as far as what we could do moving forward. And at the moment, our trade deficit last year in 21 was the largest that we've ever had in U.S. history. So I can't say that the trend has shifted yet, but I can say for the younger guys watching or anyone watching, it's got to change eventually. You gotta make what you spend. Ideally, you got to make more than you spend. And the U.S. has spent more than it's made for the last 50 years in a row.
Yeah. And
so eventually that trend will change. Now, I'll say, it's got to change now, and it might be 5 years from now. Make me look like a fool in year 4 from now, year 5. But eventually, we've had 50 years of importing more than we exported. And, the math would support that we're going to have to export for that amount of time more than we import.
Yeah, and people just don't realize what, our biggest thing is that we were able to export our inflation through, the dollar being the reserve currency as far as oil prices go. And so that's been a part of why this has lasted so long. The other reason this lasted so long is that most people don't understand how, and it's very complicated, how the Fed and the Treasury and the banks work. And basically, the long and the short of it is they transfer money back and forth between the 3 of them in some kind of stupid shell game. And so they're basically paying off one credit card with another credit card as the money transfers and circles around in this circle. And eventually that catches up to people. You can do it for a period of time, but eventually the debts start getting called and things need to get paid. But we're getting a little bit off track here, Travis. I know we wanted to stick to kind of land on this.
Let's talk
So I
land.
guess from your perspective, then trying to do something small like what you're doing, what are you looking for in land? When if you were to go buy land now and trying to tell a young guy with a young family and hey how to get out and start producing your own food, what would you be looking for in a plot of land?
So when I go and look for land, I'm looking at price per acre. I compare everything by price per acre.
I do too. 100%
All right, so
agree.
the price per acre is your number one metric. Number two, I'm looking at buildable versus protected. And by protected, I mean it might be wetland, it might be unbuildable land, et cetera, et cetera. Third, I'm looking at
hey, let me stop you right there real fast because I want to jump on that point with protected land. And then I'm sorry, I'll let you continue. One of the guys I buy cattle from down in Florida, they bought their property and their property was dry at the time they bought it, and they had these nice big pastures. Their pastures immediately afterwards flooded. I guess they were going through a drought the year they bought it, and now they're protected wetlands. They can't do anything. They can't graze on them. They can't do anything. So that's for if you're wondering, that's why he's talking about that.
Yep.
Conservationism can it's a great thing, but it can get in the way sometimes if you're not smart enough to get around it, or shouldn't say smart enough, but do enough due diligence.
Yeah, 100%. So down here in Florida, and St. Augustine's in my state, so there's a land that there's a difference between land that is wet and wetlands. And so you want, if land is buildable in the future, it has a higher value. If it's wetland, it doesn't mean that it's doesn't have value. It might have great agriculture value. But what the potential of the land, that matters a lot. I'd say the third thing in real estate, really the most, I mean, you hear this all the time, so, is location, location, location. We started farming out our little 6-acre plot here. We got a house going up on it. We got my barn up here. I've got some work trucks, tractors. I have my shop here. I used to rent a shop. Now I have it here. I'm able to get tree chips from tree companies because my land is located in an area that is convenient for other people to come by. I have 6 acres, but I'm still close to a city and close to a town where a lot of that product is coming from. A buddy of mine, about 30 miles to the south, bought his land for much cheaper than mine, almost like 90% cheaper. But he has to pay me to move chips to him. Mm-hmm. So his land, it really doesn't have any buildable potential. It's just always going to be, some land out in the country, without internet, without power, without any of that for a long period of time. The other thing about land is that land can be difficult to finance, being that you're going to pay 7% for it. So land is ideally a cash buy or an owner financing deal. Yeah. And because it's very illiquid, a lot of owners are okay with that, especially if you're the entrepreneur, the rancher that can show up and create cash flows on it.
And on that, if you come to them, people think that's impossible to do. If you go to that landowner and present them the business plan, yep. I mean, especially if that land is paid for and they don't need the cash and it's hard land to sell, and you can say, this is how I'm going to make your land more valuable. I'll buy it from you in 10 years at this price or whatever. And come up with your terms on your owner financing. Owner financing is very possible for that because and you'll get a better rate on it because they're making their money off the purchase, not off of you financing it. And so they just want to keep up with inflation. So they're going to say, 3%.
I had a 55-acre deal I was working. It kind of fell apart on me. The lady was older, school teacher, bought the land about 20 years prior, had cancer. Wasn't terminal, but wasn't going to be here 10, 20 years from now. Never wanted the land to be developed. I went out to her and I said, look, I'd like to rent the land from you and I'd like to lock in a rate. She had one heir. The heir was in and out of drug rehab, this and that. Basically, the point that I'm getting at is like this land was going to an auction block at some point in time, and the neighborhood that she never wanted to see built on it was eventually going to happen. And so I went to it and I was like, all right, 55 acres. I want to keep this the way it is. Horse equestrian area. You can rent with a option to purchase. Mm-hmm. So you can go out there and go, hey, I want to do a 9-year lease or a 7-year lease, pretty common, with an option to purchase at blank an acre. And now you're in a position where if inflation, starts pumping and you're able to make profit off that land, you're able to, 1, go finance it, or 2, just buy it outright. at some point in time. If you can lock that deal in, the piece of land that we ended up getting was a 6-acre piece of land that was bought from the original people in 1981. And they actually never stepped foot in the U.S. They were from Thailand. And somebody had passed on. And this is how land works. This is how land always goes. Somebody had passed on. It had been divided amongst 3 individuals, mainly kids and like a former spouse. And it was listed for like $229,000. And one of my good buddies growing up lived right next door on the other side of the fence. I mean, literally we share a fence line. And I remember being at a bonfire in 2008 after New Year's, or at New Year's party. And the guys are riding 4-wheelers and stuff over. This is just a vacant piece of land. And I remember sitting there going like, we're going to get that piece of land right there. Like I'm going to live out here. And I didn't realize until I was clearing it. And his mother actually came over and was like, hands on the hips, like, oh, hi, Travis, like that type of thing. I was like, oh, I remember that. I remember putting that out, like, and having that affirmation. And then it came true. But nonetheless, the deal was, it was $229. It dropped in price to $193. I was clearing some land behind it. I saw it. I talked to my mom. She's in real estate. My mom's like, lock it in. I'm like, that's a little bit more than I have on cash. Like my wife and I, like, it's more than we'd have to sell some stuff and make that happen. And it was kind of a cash deal, the way that the property was. And anyway, we wrote the contract in a way where we could get out with our initial deposit 5 days before closing. And so we did all of our due diligence. And if you're going to buy land, you need to do some mineral rights. You need to do some surveys. There's some work to go into it. So if you're going to do an offer on a property,
that actually brings up a good point about mineral rights, and kind of we can. I want to wrap this up here shortly, so we're not getting too long. But I guess we can end there with that. What are your thoughts on mineral rights and general rights with the property?
Yeah, I mean, well, in our case, we had some tortoises that were out here, and we had some power lines that were a concern, and so I wrote all that into the secondary offer, and I said, look, I've got time to get out with my deposit, and I put in an offer at $193, which is your full asking price, but I got to be in it at $150, and I can close on my regular closing date, which is literally 5 days from now, and they took it.
Yeah.
And so that money was already mentally split. So from $229 down to $150, we grabbed for $150. You couldn't touch this place for less than $450 today.
Yeah.
Just the land alone, not the structures that we have on it.
Yeah, that's kind of where we're at with our property, because our property has almost doubled in value since we bought it.
Yeah, exactly. And plus the clearing and the driveway and stuff I put on it. So, and the plants and everything else. So my thoughts there is, like, you just have to do your due diligence. You have to be with the right people. You've got to know who knows what's going on. In our area, gopher tortoises are a big deal. They're protected. We want to coexist with the tortoises. I think it's pretty cool. Have your buddies over, have a beer, and be like, yo, man, I got a tortoise. But it'll cost you $2,500 if they're in the wrong spot per tortoise. So you have to think about,
even if they're in the wrong spot, how do you have any effect over the tortoise? If you're not doing anything to them, why does it matter?
Yeah, well, the nest. So if you have a tortoise nest, you have to do a 50-foot perimeter around it. You can't touch it. No driveway, no nothing.
Okay.
Unless you pay to move the nest, which you have to have FWC, which is Florida Wildlife Control, come in and remove each tortoise, and they charge $2,500 a tortoise.
Okay.
No,
so
they're endangered.
That's really interesting. So because in Alabama, and realize, guys, all these rules kind of change a little bit depending on what state you're in. Yep. Because in Alabama, I don't really worry that much about water rights, because it's not really a big deal. The state doesn't own the water rights. Nobody cares about it here, because we have abundant wells. We have 56 inches of annual rainfall. But you go to Wyoming, the state owns the water rights. So you better have a well on that property when you buy it, because drilling one can be a bit of a nightmare. So my general thought on mineral rights, is I think, as a general rule, people panic way too much about mineral rights, because if you're buying small plots of land, it's very unusual for them to come in there and try to, you would have to have something very valuable for them to do it. And there's a bunch of regulations on how they have to do that, how they have to pay you and compensate you for it. They're not going to do it unless they can make a small fortune. And you're probably going to make some money if they have to come in there and do it, because they generally have to pay you something for it. Right. The other thing that I on that is, if you're buying large lands, it's a different story. If you're buying a lot of property, and I'm talking, it's maybe over 100 acres, and if you're buying a lot of property, that's something to be concerned with, and figure out at least who owns the mineral rights, or who owns the current mineral rights, if they're willing to sell them. and because they may be willing to sell them to you for nothing. If there's no minerals on there, you might be able to pick those up for 10 cents on the dollar.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, in Florida, it's normally the wetlands that are the most protected. And we have certain rules where, like, if you run a driveway or an easement through it, you're allowed to go 50 feet this way or 25 feet this way and 25 feet this way, which is kind of messes up the wetland in a way. But as long as the water flows properly, you can run a road through it, but you can't develop on top of it.
Gotcha.
And so that changes a lot of it. I'm a super hippie environmentalist myself, big time. And I mean, we don't use fertilizer. You don't, that type of thing. Like, I'm very, very into the land. But unfortunately, what you guys will find is that there is a group of parasitic leeches out there that will do anything in the name of environmentalism, and to which it changes the structure of the deal. Doesn't mean that deals can't be had. I think we've discussed today, like, you can rent to own. You can lease. You can get traditional financing on these things. If you get a home on there, you can definitely get better rates on financing. There are many different cash flows that you can pull off of a piece of land, but there will be a third party that is going to want to be interested in that purchase, and that'll be the environmental folks, and they're gonna have something. In our area, it's tortoises, and it's a bird called the scrub jay, which I've never seen a scrub jay. But if you get a scrub jay on your land, you cannot build on it.
Yeah, I remember that was a big thing when I think it was at Fort Benning, where they had this endangered woodpecker down there. That was a real, like, we couldn't, I mean, you'd stop, like, training you'd have tanks running through and everybody, I'll stop at a freaking woodpecker. Yeah, it's like, ridiculous. So, But anyways, Travis, I think that, like I said, I don't want to go too long with this one. I wanted to give people a kind of a 30-minute overview on buying some land, to give them some kind of thought processes there. So bottom line is, guys, is just start. There is a way to finance it. You're not necessarily going to be able to finance it traditionally, but there are a million ways to do it, whether that's owner financing, selling some of your stuff, getting a lease purchase option or a rental contract or something along those lines. There are a lot of ways to finance this if you're willing to take a step back to take 2 steps forward. So,
in conclusion, for you guys watching this, I think the biggest opportunity for you guys is to go hook. If you're starting with zero, you're starting on nothing, go work for a guy like this guy. Go work for him and learn the trade and learn about the land and learn about operating a tractor and changing a tire and doing all those different things. And then move into your deal, and at which point you'll be able to pull possible investor interest. And if you're able to do that, then literally it's unlimited. Yeah. You've got the skills, and you're mobile enough to go meet and learn from a guy. At that point, man, you're unlimited. And I just think that that's like the most, I mean, literally the only thing that's holding anyone back in this audience from doing anything they want is literally in their mind. Yep. Like Les Brown, he always says that the richest place is the graveyard, right? Because that's where all the unwritten books are, all the unwritten movies, all the ideas that never came to fruition. So I guess that's a good place to end this one, Travis. I really appreciate you coming on and joining me for this, man. It's always fun. So we'll catch y'all on the next one. Travis, you got anything you want to say? Oh, I'm sorry. No. Quick. Jump over to Travis's channel. The link will be down in the description. Make sure you go subscribe over there if you haven't already done so. And share the video, guys. Give us some likes. That helps us out. Cool. Awesome. All right. Thanks, man.